The exercise or the tool in front of us is called fishing for barriers. This is also an important, relevant tool because finding out a way to complete your project calls for you to identify the big barriers, big kind of groups of problems that your project is facing and chunk them down into more concrete causes, more or easily understandable causes and more manageable problems. So, what is it? This is a tool that is all about diving deep into your problem and making it as granular as possible. It is very illustrative and very catchy due to the metaphors that we will be using, primarily the one relating to the fish and the boat, so you're quite likely to remember it easily. When should you use it? So you should use it when you're analyzing the system around your project, so not about the project itself, but about the context it sits in. And why is it useful? So the tool fosters the stakeholder integration, integrating different perspectives and different expectations under the same structure, which will give you a richer vision of the range of problems affecting your project. So, in terms of mechanics, how do we run this workshop? It is a relatively short one compared to the previous one, simply because the previous one was very reliant on the number of maps you would be building. So this one should last from 40 to 60 minutes, and it is of medium to high level of difficulty. What you will get out of it is a very thorough graph visualization with a categorized list of barriers or problems and their causes for your innovation project or a challenge, as well as the relations between them. And what you will need is a description of your big problems coupled with a somewhat fuzzy or not so elaborate idea of the solution you set out and the system in which you are embedded. So by system we mean stakeholders, technologies, regulations, behavioral aspects, so anything that comprises a typical system. So we will start with, first of all, defining ourselves. And as you can see on the picture, this is quite a metaphorical part of the exercise, which helps us to remember it quite well. So you start by taking a large piece of paper and sketching the fishing canvas, like the one you see on the screen. So we will be using 4 key items that this image represents: the boat, the fish's heads, and the fishbone. So first off, the boat. The boat itself represents your project trying to move forward. So just imagine yourself sitting at the wheel of the boat, going in the right direction, going ahead, wanting to work on a project, wanting to find out a solution that you're dealing with. In this case, it is trying to scale up and break into the dominant system to bring about transformative change to a dominant or status quo system. The fish account for types of barriers obstructing the performance of your project. Moreover, the heads of the fish account for one big problem you are facing, for something quite specific. For instance, a fleet of old public transport buses, shortage of public buses drivers, or high competition from the dominant system, etc. So something quite specific. Then it comes to the fishbone. The fishbone accounts for those problems and causes making up the main barrier. So we are breaking up the main barrier into more granular pieces, more granular blocks, or problems and its causes. For instance, there might be infrastructure causes underlying the poor and inefficient public transport system in your city, but also user habits, different or non-supportive regulations to a more optimized, efficient, and more clean public transport, etc. So these are just very basic examples. And each of these categories would account for one of the branches of the fishbone. Now, step 2. So the first step is to run a traditional brainstorming session in order to come up with as many problems as possible. So you can be very creative here, and it's quite flexible. So any type of a brainstorming session would be of help here. So first, spend some minutes to individually think of the problems you think you're facing. And this can be addressing a major air pollution problem in your city and seeing what causes it. Is it a big number of old and polluting vehicles? Is it a dirty industry not using up-to-date environmental protection or filters or something else? So write them down on Post-its, one problem per each Post-it, and start a round of explanations in which everybody introduces and explains their ideas, putting them on a wall so that you can see them all in front of you at the same time. After introducing all the problems, start the discussion making clusters with 3 or 4 or 2 or 5 problems as the most important for the project. So try and cluster them, group them out. And in the process, you may want to rephrase some problems to better explain a specific a group or cluster of problems. Now, step 3. You will draw a fish for each problem you have decided to work on. And it's also important not to lose yourself in this exercise. And by this, I mean you should limit the number of those problems to 3 or 4 at the most. So draw a fish for each problem you decide to work on, put the Post-it with the problem on the head of the fish, and start breaking down the problem. And you can do that by asking yourself a question of why is something happening. Write down the answer and stick it on one of the fishbone branches. Next, to consider the overarching barrier, decide those categories of causes you think are underlying the barrier and that you want to dive into. For instance, if your barrier has to do with a dominant system and the difficulties to break into it, you could use the middle or meso-level domains as categories, such as infrastructure, institutions, knowledge, user behaviors, cultural values, industrial capacity, actor configuration. Or you could go for something less systemic and include categories such as the user's perspective, data, digital services, time or duration or timeline, impact, communication issues, feedback, etc. If this is the case, that your barrier is more specific, more limited, and not related to a big system, then you might use a project-oriented categorization of material, people, methods, machines, measurements. So after deciding the categories, and we have now provided 3 different types of categories, draw a branch accounting for each category and then start identifying causes under each fishbone branch. And write one cause on the Post-it and place them on the fishbone. After having done the last step, the previous step, we have only one more to go through. And the last step of the tool is to prioritize the problems you need to sort out in the short term. To do that, you can use any method you know, ranging from a simple dot voting to a multi-criteria process, or by assessing each cause according to its impact on the project and the time frame for those impacts. Then, so this is something that you can see on the picture in front of you. And then those causes or problems falling on the short-term and high-impact quadrant will be the most urgent for you to start taking action against. Finally, you gathered a comprehensive list of problems holding back your project progression. Now spend some time reflecting on the outcomes you obtained and the process used to get them. Do you think you have a clear idea about the barriers you are about to face? Did you find something new or unexpected about your project and the system it sits within? Is there any domain or category the importance of which outweighs the others? Did you use the same categories for all the barriers? Why? or why not? Do you think the main barriers are related to your own performance as a project team, or do they come from outside, from the dominant system? Do you think other projects around yours are facing the same type of barriers? And so with these questions, we will finish this exercise.